80% of the people who have died on Everest never made it to the top. They were coming back from it. The mountain is built like a trap. To reach the summit, you burn through everything you have: oxygen, strength, the ability to think clearly, and then you still have to walk the whole way back. At an altitude where the body stops adapting and starts to fail fast, where crevasses hide under the snow and seracs collapse without warning, where people walk past the dying, because to stop is to die yourself. In the next few minutes, we are going to walk the entire route with you, from base camp to the summit and back. Every camp, every dangerous stretch, every zone that has taken lives. And by the end, it will be clear why the summit is not the finish line. The summit is only the halfway point, 8,849 meters. Everest, the highest point on the planet, a peak standing on the border between Nepal and Tibet. The Nepalese call it Sagarmatha, the forehead of the sky. The Tibetans call it Chomolungma, mother of the universe. The rest of the world knows it as Everest, named after a British surveyor who never actually saw the mountain. On the 29th of May, 1953, the New Zealander Edmund Hillary and the Nepalese Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first human beings to stand on the top. Since then, the summit has been reached more than 13,700 times by more than 7,500 different people: teachers, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, retirees, people who had never set foot on a mountain before, and people who had given their entire lives to the mountains. There are two classic routes to the top of Everest: from the north, out of Tibet, over the South Col, and from the south, out of Nepal, through the Khumbu Icefall and the South Col. The southern route is more popular and also more deadly. An Everest expedition costs anywhere from $28,000 with budget operators to more than $200,000 at the premium end. The Nepali government permit alone costs $15,000 as of 2025. For that money, you get the right to try, not a guarantee that you will come home. By the end of 2025, 339 people had died on Everest. There was a time when 1 out of every 4 climbers never came back. Today the statistics look better, fewer than 1 death per 100 ascents. But there are 3 times as many people on the mountain as there were 20 years ago, and the absolute number of deaths is not falling. The mountain has not become safer. It has simply become more crowded. Everest Base Camp sits at an altitude of 5,364 meters. That is already higher than most peaks in North America, and it is only the beginning of the route. Every spring, a temporary city rises on the Khumbu Glacier. More than 1,200 people, over 40 expeditions, hundreds of tents, satellite internet, solar panels, a medical clinic, a bakery. From a distance, it almost looks cozy, colored dots on the white ice. But this city is built on a glacier that moves nearly a meter every day. The ground beneath your feet is constantly shifting, cracking, groaning. The glacier has lost roughly 40 meters of thickness since 1953, enough that Nepal has announced plans to move the camp to a lower location. Despite all of this, base camp was long considered a safe place. Not comfortable, not easy, but safe. In all of recorded Everest history, no avalanche had ever reached it. Not until the 25th of April, 2015. At 11:56 in the morning, local time, an earthquake of magnitude 7.8 tore through the region. From the ridge between Pumori and Lingtrin, about 900 meters above the camp, an avalanche broke loose. What came down was not just snow. A blast of air tore through the center of the camp, flinging tents and people across the glacier. Eyewitnesses compared it to the shock wave of an explosion. 19 people died in base camp, at least 10 of them Nepali workers. It remains the deadliest disaster in the mountain's history. For the first time in 41 years, not a single person summited Everest from the southern side that season. The mountain had shown that there are no safe places on it, and it had shown this at the very start of the route. Beyond base camp comes the first true test of the climb, 4 kilometers of frozen chaos. The Khumbu Icefall. Here, the glacier drops 600 meters, breaking apart into gigantic blocks. Seracs as tall as a 12-story building. Between them, yawn crevasses more than 100 meters deep, some of them 15 meters wide or wider. The only way across is on aluminum ladders lashed together and laid over the abyss. 30 to 50 ladders, and about 5 kilometers of fixed ropes. Climbers cross the icefall before dawn, between 2 and 5 in the morning. In the cold, the ice is more stable and the seracs collapse less often. In darkness, by the beam of a headlamp, a climber steps onto a ladder with nothing but a bottomless pit below. Crampons scrape on aluminum, the rope is taut, and all around the ice cracks and moans. An experienced climber can get through the icefall in 3 to 6 hours. A beginner may need 10 or 12. Each season, the route through the icefall is laid by a special team of about 8 elite Sherpas. They are known as the Icefall Doctors. They arrive in early March, weeks before the expeditions, and they maintain the route every day until the end of May. Their pay is $2,500 to $3,000 for the whole season. But even they cannot predict when the next serac will fall. Nobody can. On the 18th of April, 2014, at 6:45 in the morning, before the sun had even touched the icefall, a block of ice weighing about 14,000 tons broke away from the western shoulder of Everest and crashed down onto the area climbers call the Popcorn Field. At an altitude of roughly 5,800 meters, 25 people stood in the path of the avalanche. 16 Sherpas died in seconds. 13 bodies were recovered. 3 remain under 80 to 100 meters of ice. The government of Nepal offered the families 40,000 rupees each, about $400, barely enough to pay for a funeral. The Sherpas went on strike and refused to work for the rest of the season. Out of 658 summits the previous year, only 106 were made. The season was effectively ruined. Between 1953 and 2023, 47 people died in the Khumbu Icefall. The overwhelming majority of them were Sherpas. A paying client crosses the icefall 4 to 8 times during an expedition. Sherpas cross it 20 to 40 times. Skill does not equalize the odds. It simply increases the number of throws in a lottery nobody can win. Past the icefall, climbers step out onto a flat glacier. Camp 1 stands at 6,065 meters. A transit stop, a minimum of tents, never one unnecessary night. The paradox of this place: by day, the temperature inside the tents can climb to 29 degrees from the reflected sun, and at night, it drops to -15. The oxygen in the air is 47% of what it is at sea level. Headaches, nausea, insomnia. Some people get this far and realize the body simply refuses to go any further. Between Camp 1 and Camp 2, the glacier looks smooth and calm, but beneath the even surface of the snow, hide crevasses that you cannot see until you fall into one. Namgyal Chering Sherpa in 2012, Mingma Sherpa in 2013, Pemba Tashi Sherpa in 2021. All 3 of them died in crevasses on this same stretch. None of them made a mistake. They were simply walking along the route. Beyond that lies the Western Sibyam, a huge U-shaped valley 4 kilometers long, hemmed in by the walls of Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. It is called the Valley of Silence. The wind cannot reach inside, and in the stillness you feel an absolute heavy quiet. But without wind, the valley turns into a heat trap. The sun reflects off the surrounding ice walls, heating the air to 38 degrees. A minute later, a cloud rolls in and the temperature crashes below zero. Camp 2 is the second largest after base camp. More than 100 people, 3 to 5 nights of acclimatization. The danger here is not avalanches. No seracs collapse. No walls come down. The danger here is what you cannot see. Altitude sickness, cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, heart attack, dehydration. On the 29th of April, 2001, Babu Chiri Sherpa stepped out of his tent at Camp 2 to photograph the fresh snow. 100 meters from camp. He was 35 years old, 10 summits of Everest, 21 hours on the top without supplemental oxygen, a world record. One of the strongest high-altitude climbers in history. He fell into a narrow crevasse, invisible beneath the snow. His body was pulled from a depth of 10 to 30 meters. 60 Sherpas carried him through the icefall for 8 hours. Babu Chiri was not taking risks. He was not ignoring his body. He was not making bad decisions. He had simply stepped out to take a photograph. And this part of the route, the part that does not look dangerous, took a man who knew Everest better than almost anyone alive. From Camp 2, the route changes in an instant. What had been flat and deceptively calm becomes a wall. The Lhotse Face, 1,125 meters of blue ice at an angle of 40 to 50 degrees, in places as steep as 80. It fills the entire field of vision, a smooth, shining, endless surface rising up and up. The entire climb is on fixed ropes. The climber clips a jumar, a mechanical ascender, onto the line and pulls himself up, step by step. Every step is the bite of a crampon into the ice, a check that the points are holding, a shift of weight, the next kick. If a crampon slips or the rope fails, you fall, and on a slope this steep, there is almost no chance of stopping. The climb from Camp 2 to Camp 3 takes 4 to 6 hours. Many guides use this section as a filter. Anyone who cannot make it in 5 hours is pulled from the expedition, not out of cruelty, but out of simple math. If the Lhotse Face drains all your strength, you have no chance in the death zone. The wall does not forgive carelessness. In 1996, the Taiwanese climber Chen Yu-nan stepped out of his tent at Camp 3 without putting on his crampons. He slipped and died. In 2016, the Sherpa Ang Furba fell while fixing ropes for the climbers who would come after him. That same fall of 1996, an avalanche on the face took 3 lives, among them Lobsang Jangbu, the Sirdar of the Mountain Madness expedition and a key figure in the May tragedy we will come to in a moment. Camp 3 sits at 7,200 meters. Tents are not pitched here. They are cut into the ice on a slope of about 30 degrees. The platforms are uneven. You sleep almost sitting up. Oxygen is 40% of normal. Sleep becomes a kind of torture. Climbers drift off feeling like hours have passed, only to find that 10 minutes have gone by. The body does not rest. It simply burns through the little strength it has, left a bit more slowly. Sherpas refuse to spend the night at Camp 3. They would rather descend back to Camp 2 and climb up again. They would take extra hours on the ascent over a single night on that shelf. Above Camp 3, the route runs through the Yellow Band, a layer of ancient limestone embedded in the ice. Once, it was the floor of an ocean. Then comes the Geneva Spur, the final rock buttress before you step out into open ground. And finally, the South Col, 7,920 meters, Camp 4, the last stop before the summit. The South Col is a stony plateau the size of 2 football fields, wedged between Everest and Lhotse. There is almost no snow here. The wind takes it all. The wind holds steady between 50 and 100 kilometers an hour, with gusts reaching 200 or more. On the ground, you see torn tents from previous seasons, empty oxygen bottles, shreds of rope frozen into the rock. Climbers who have been here say it looks like a lunar landscape, except that on the moon, there is no wind that can knock you off your feet. This is where the death zone begins. Everything above 8,000 meters is territory where the human body no longer adapts. It only loses strength. Air pressure falls to less than a third of sea level. Every breath brings in a third of the normal amount of oxygen. Blood oxygen saturation drops to 50 or 60%. In any hospital in the world, that would be an emergency admission. Up here, it is normal. The resting pulse climbs to 140 or 160 beats a minute. The body begins to burn resources faster than it can replace them. Digestion essentially shuts down. The brain works as if the person were utterly exhausted. Slow reactions, tangled thoughts, an inability to make even the simplest decision. Hallucinations begin. Climbers see people who are not there. They hear voices. They feel as though they are on a boat. The sensations of warmth and cold stop being reliable, a well-documented symptom of late-stage hypothermia. Without supplemental oxygen, the body can hold out for 16 to 20 hours up here. With oxygen, 24 to 36. After that, organ failure begins, and it cannot be reversed. The clock is running, and every climber who steps out of a tent at the South Col knows this. If something goes wrong up there, rescue is almost impossible. On the 2nd of October, 1979, Hannelore Schmatz was descending from the summit of Everest. She was 39 years old, only the 4th woman in history to stand on the highest point on Earth. The climb itself had gone well. The descent did not. Schmatz and the American climber, Ray Genet, stopped to bivouac at an altitude of about 8,300 meters. It was not a plan. It was a last resort. Neither of them had the strength left to reach Camp 4, so they bedded down right on the route, in the death zone, with no shelter. The temperature dropped far below -40. At this altitude, the body can no longer generate enough heat. muscles spent from hours of climbing, dehydration, and oxygen starvation doing the rest. During the night, Jeanette died of cold. Schmatz survived him for a little while, but by morning she was beyond saving. Her body remained where she had stopped, leaning back against her pack. For nearly 20 years, every climber heading for the summit on the southern route walked past Hannelore Schmatz. She became a marker, a point by which climbers fixed their position on the route, not a sign, not a flag, the figure of a human being left on the slope. In 1984, two Nepalese men, Police Inspector Yogendra Bahadur Thapa and the guide Ang Dorje, climbed up to bring her body down. Both of them died in the attempt. To take the dead off this mountain cost two living men their lives. Later, the wind swept the remains of Schmatz off the Khumbu Face. She disappeared from the route, but by then, Everest had other bodies that had become landmarks in their turn. And the most famous of them all is not on the southern side of the mountain, but on the northern. The southern route is not the only way up Everest. From the opposite side, out of Tibet, comes the northern route, over the South Col and along the northeast ridge. And there, at an altitude of about 8,500 meters in a shallow limestone cave, lies a body the whole world knows. Bright green Koflak plastic boots. The man lies tucked into the shelter of the cave, his face turned away from the wind. No one calls him by his name. They call him Green Boots. With a high degree of certainty, this is Tsewang Paljor, a 28-year-old officer of the Indian Border Police. On the 10th of May, 1996, he and two teammates, Tsewang Smanla and Dorje Morup, were climbing the North Ridge. Over the radio, they reported that they had reached the summit. It would later come to light that in all likelihood they were still about 150 meters short of the top. That same day, a storm came down on the mountain, the same storm that on the southern side would destroy the groups of Rob Hall and Scott Fischer. All three of the Indian climbers died. Paljor's body, in those green boots, stayed in the cave. Year after year, hundreds of climbers walked past him. He became a landmark on the northern route, so familiar that climbers stopped noticing him. In 2014, the Chinese authorities moved the body and partially covered it with stones. But by then, this cave had already entered history for another reason. On the 15th of May, 2006, in the same cave, next to Green Boots, David Sharp died. He was 34 years old, English. He was climbing alone, no Sherpa, no radio, no satellite phone, a budget package for $7,400 through the company Asian Trekking. He carried 2 emergency bottles of oxygen. Sharp most likely reached the summit, or came very close to it, on the 14th of May. On the way down, he made it to the cave and stopped. He could not get up again. Over the next hours, more than 40 climbers passed him. Some of them realized he was still alive. Sherpas from another expedition gave him oxygen and spent about an hour trying to get him to his feet. It was no use. Sharp died of hypothermia and, most likely, cerebral edema. The news went around the world. Mark Inglis, a New Zealander who became the first man without both legs to stand on the top of Everest that day, found himself at the center of a storm of criticism. His group had walked past Sharp. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to ever stand on the summit, did not hide his horror. A human life is far more important than simply getting to the top of a mountain. But the summit of Everest is not only a place where people walk past the dying, it is also a place where people stand in line to get there. On the 22nd of May, 2019, the Nepalese climber Nirmal Purja reached the summit at 5:30 in the morning. He turned around and took a picture of what he saw behind him. Hundreds of people in bright down suits, standing in an unbroken chain along the ridge, from the Hillary Step to the South Summit. A neon queue reaching into the sky. The photograph went around the world in a matter of hours, and it became the symbol of what Everest had become. That season, Nepal had issued a record 381 permits, but the weather allowed only about 5 usable days for summit attempts instead of the usual 11. When the weather window finally opened between the 20th and the 22nd of May, hundreds of climbers set out at the same time. At what was left of the Hillary Step after the 2015 earthquake, a traffic jam formed. The wait stretched to 2 or 3 hours, at an altitude where every minute shortens your life. Some people spent 15 to 20 hours above 8,000 meters. The safe maximum is 10 to 12. Oxygen ran out in the queue. People lost body heat standing in place, not moving. 11 people died that season. Donald Lynn Cash, 55, American. He collapsed on the summit while having his picture taken. Robin Haynes Fischer, 44, British. A few days before his summit push, he had written on Instagram that delays caused by the traffic jams could prove deadly. He died 150 meters below the summit on the way down. Christopher Coolish, 62, American, came back to his tent from the summit in good spirits and good health. He was found dead in his sleeping bag, probably his heart. He was finishing the Seven Summits program. Anjali Kulkarni, 55, from India, refused to turn back, saying she had invested 10 years of her earnings in this expedition. She died on the descent, below the balcony. And this was not the only case where a refusal to turn around cost a life. 3 years earlier, in 2012, the 33-year-old Nepali-Canadian climber Shreya Shah Chlorofine had made Everest her very first serious climb. She had never put on crampons until she reached base camp. She had trained by running with a weighted backpack. Her company, Utmost Adventure Trekking, had never put a single client on the summit before her. The senior Sherpa guide refused to lead her above base camp, warning that she could kill both herself and his Sherpas. She was sent up with a less experienced team. On the 18th and 19th of May, she reached the summit after 18 to 22 hours of continuous climbing. Her oxygen ran out on the descent. She collapsed at 8,400 meters, 27 hours on her feet. The traffic jam was a factor, but not the only one, and probably not the main one. A narrow weather window, a lack of experience, bad oxygen planning, and the inability to make the decision to turn around. Any of these takes lives just as often as the queue itself. The summit is not the finish. The summit is the middle of the route, and it is on the way back down that Everest takes most of its victims. A study published in the British Medical Journal in 2008 analyzed 192 deaths above base camp over 85 years. Out of 94 deaths above 8,000 meters, 56% happened on the descent after the summit. Another 17% happened when climbers turned back below the top. Together, 73%. The popular claim that 80% die on the way down is an exaggeration, but the order of magnitude is right. Of those who die in the death zone, the overwhelming majority die on the way back. There is one detail in that statistic that matters more than any number. The median time of ascent for those who survived was before 10 in the morning. For those who died, it was after 1 in the afternoon. A late summit is one of the strongest predictors of death on Everest, but turning back when the top is already in sight, very few people can do that. Sherpas die on the descent 6 times less often than foreign clients. A lifetime of acclimatization gives them a protection you cannot build up in 2 months of an expedition. Above all, a protection against the cognitive collapse that happens when the brain simply stops making decisions. On the 10th of May, 1996, Rob Hall stood on the summit. He was 35 years old, a New Zealander, co-founder of the company Adventure Consultants, with 4 successful Everest summits behind him and 39 clients brought to the top without a single loss. Next to him stood his client, Doug Hansen, a 46-year-old postal worker from Washington State. Hansen had climbed with Hall the previous year and turned back just 100 meters short of the top. After that, Hall had called him a dozen times, offering him a discount if he would come back and try again. Hansen came back. Hansen reached the top at about 4 in the afternoon. That was catastrophically late. On the descent, near the south summit, he collapsed. His oxygen ran out. Base camp was begging Hall over the radio to abandon his client and come down alone. Hall refused. That night, the storm came down on the mountain. Winds of 130 kilometers an hour, wind chill near -60. The guide Andy Harris climbed up toward Hall with a supply of oxygen and vanished. By the morning of the 11th of May, Hall radioed down. Doug is gone. Hall's hands were so badly frostbitten that he could not clip himself to the fixed ropes. His oxygen regulator was choked with ice. Later that day, Base Camp patched Hall through on a satellite phone to his wife, Jan Arnold, in New Zealand. She was 7 months pregnant. They talked about what to name their daughter. Hall's last words were, "I love you. Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Rob Hall's body was found on the 23rd of May near the south summit. His wife asked that he be left on the mountain. Their daughter, Sarah Arnold Hall, was born 2 months later. That same night, on the same route, in the same storm, a second guide died. Scott Fischer, 40 years old, American, founder of the company Mountain Madness, tall, charismatic, physically powerful, the exact opposite of the reserved, methodical Hall. Two competitors leading their groups to the summit on the same day. Fischer was very likely already ill before the summit push. A few days before going up, he had come down from the higher camps to base camp himself to personally evacuate a sick client, Dale Cruz. That descent and the climb back up had burned through the reserves he would need higher on the mountain. Doctors who later analyzed his behavior suggested a subclinical pulmonary or cerebral edema, a condition that cannot be diagnosed in the field, but that slowly shuts the body down from inside. Fischer reached the summit at about 3:45 in the afternoon, nearly 2 hours past the agreed turnaround deadline. On the descent, he slowed with every step. At the balcony, at an altitude of about 8,350 meters, he stopped. He could not go any further. They left him there with oxygen and a promise to come back. When the Russian guide Anatoly Bukrev reached him at about 7 in the evening on the 11th of May, there was nothing left to do for Fischer. His gear was in disarray, a sign of what doctors call paradoxical undressing, a condition that appears in the late stages of hypothermia when the body's temperature regulation breaks down. Bukrev would find himself at the center of a furious argument that would divide the climbing community for years. He had climbed without supplemental oxygen and had descended to Camp 4 ahead of his clients. The journalist John Krakauer, in his book Into Thin Air, would condemn that decision as reckless. But it was precisely because Bukrev had reached camp before the others that he was able to do what nobody else did that night: go out into the storm alone 3 separate times and bring 3 clients back: Sandy Hill Pittman, Charlotte Fox, and Tim Madsen. Without him, they would have died on the slope that night. The American Alpine Club awarded Bukrev its highest honor for valor. 18 months later, in December of 1997, Anatoly Bukrev was killed by an avalanche on Annapurna. The tragedy of 1996 did not make Everest safer. It made it more famous. 2 years later, in the spring of 1998, another story unfolded on the northern route, a story that would go down in the chronicles of the mountain as one of the hardest of them all. On the 22nd of May, Frances Arsentiev, 40 years old, American, reached the summit of Everest without supplemental oxygen. She became the first American woman to do so. Climbing beside her was her husband, the Russian climber Sergei Arsentiev. The ascent was a success, but on the descent, in the dark, they lost each other. On the 23rd of May, Uzbek climbers found Frances at an altitude of about 8,500 to 8,600 meters. She was alive, but barely conscious. Severe frostbite, no coordination left. The Uzbeks gave her oxygen and tried to help, but they had neither the strength nor the means to carry her down. They descended. Later that same day, heading down, they met Sergei coming the other way. He was climbing, alone, with oxygen and medicine for his wife. No one would ever see him alive again. In 1999, his body was found lower on the route. He had fallen while trying to reach Frances. On the 24th of May, the South African climbers Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd found Frances, and she was still alive, more than 24 hours above 8,500 meters without oxygen. She was conscious, but could barely speak. Woodall and O'Dowd tried to get her on her feet. Her body no longer obeyed her. Her coordination was completely gone. They could not carry her. Their own oxygen was running out. They made the decision to leave. Frances Arsentiev died on the 24th of May, 1998. Her body remained on the route, her face turned toward Tibet. The climbers who passed her gave her a name, Sleeping Beauty. For 9 years, she lay in plain sight of everyone climbing the North Ridge. In 2007, Ian Woodall came back to Everest, not for the summit, for her. He climbed up to the place where he had left Frances 9 years earlier, wrapped her body in an American flag, and carefully moved her off the route onto a rocky ledge where she could no longer be seen from below. She is still there. Frances Arsentiev is one of the very few whose body was at least moved away from the route. Most of the dead do not even get that. There are about 200 bodies still on Everest. 2/3 of all those who have died on the mountain have never been brought down. They lie where they fell, frozen into the ice, buried under snow, bleached by ultraviolet light. Taking a body off the mountain from above 8,000 meters is a task right at the edge of the impossible. Together with its gear, frozen into the ice, it can weigh more than 100 kilograms, and every kilogram feels twice as heavy at this altitude. Up here, 2 men struggle to carry a single oxygen bottle weighing 8 kilograms. Freeing the frozen remains takes hours of work on your knees at -40 in an oxygen mask. In 2024, the Nepali army carried out an operation to recover 5 bodies. 12 soldiers and 18 Sherpas worked at high altitude for several days. Each body took between 11 and 18 hours of continuous work. One of them took 2 full days. The total cost of the operation was more than $600,000. The price tag for a single body was $75,000 to $80,000, and even that does not guarantee the safety of the rescuers. In 1984, 2 Nepalese men died trying to bring down the body of Hannelore Schmatz. The attempt to bring the dead back sometimes costs the lives of those who go up after them. That is not a figure of speech. It is a fact that keeps repeating itself. Between 2019 and 2024, 12 bodies and more than 180 tons of garbage were removed from Everest and the surrounding peaks. In 2025, Nepal approved a 5-year plan to clean up the mountain, but everyone knows this is a drop in the ocean. Most of them will stay up there forever. From far away, Everest looks the way it always has, a white cone against a blue sky. Silence, beauty, calm, but every part of the route we have just walked has taken someone's life. The icefall, the crevasses, the wall, the col, the ridge, the summit, the descent. Every zone has its price, and every zone has collected it. And those the mountain has taken remain on it, invisible from below, but still there, a part of the route, forever.